of tubes and liquids right in the cellar of Cambridge, where John Maynard Keynes taught. There is still an apparatus of tubes and liquids which describes, or supposedly describes, the economy, and where then the state can alter certain inputs like interest rates or fiscal capacity, taxes, etc., in order to produce a novel output. And so this kind of social engineering is also part of the 20th century kind of system theories. Last but not least, this, let's say, enthusiasm about planning, about Keynesianism, came to a halt in the 1970s, as Ariander Lindertz describes, with certain disillusioning about the efficacy of this planning. Stagflation dominated in Western countries, and there was no clear, let's say, economic planning therapy that was able to solve this kind of problem. And this led to the end of, let's say, the more classical system theorists and the rise of this originally biological idea of autopoietic systems, so systems that basically decentrally create their own order. So we will get to this at the end. So this just as a little summary also of the reading for today, the history of functionalism in the sciences and in sociology. So before we move into the more sociological theories about functionalism, let's clarify the term function and functionalism a little bit more. Here are a couple of different senses in which the term function occurs. The first one, I've already been using it, is to describe certain set of theories, certain kinds of explanations as well, with the term functionalist, functionalism. So here it's just a meta term. Then we saw that a very basic use of function is just the ascription of function, as when we say that the function of education, right, is to, for instance, transfer knowledge to the next generation. Then we know of the term function also in the sense of occupational roles or activities. Yeah? So functionalism is, for this reason, also linked to theories of what is called functional differentiation of society into different roles, right? Where just in the education system, for instance, my role is the one of an instructor, and I've just realized this role of being an instructor, or this function, right? And in my function as instructor, I have certain responsibilities, but also freedoms, right? So there's this use of function. Then there's a mechanical use of the term function, where we say that, just functioning of an automobile or of an institution. Yeah. Then very different use is the intentional purpose use of the term function, as when we say the function of, right, my action was to achieve a certain goal. Yeah. So the fact that function is such a colorful term is also linked to, let's say, this confusion between just mechanical functioning on the one hand, and then the more intentional use of the term. We have the use of the term function also in the mathematical sense, and in sociology this is obviously also used. And then to increase confusion here even more, function can also replace the term cause, right? As when we say that, for instance, educational success is a function of state investment, where this is replaceable by the term cause, probably. Yeah. Yes, I draw on right here philosopher in order to get to this list of different uses of the term function. And the question now is a little bit, let's say, which uses of the term functions are, let's say, adequate in the social sciences, and what do we actually imply when we use the term function, or when we use functional statements of the type A is a function of B. So again, drawing on right here, a couple of expectations or implications that we have when we utter functional statements. So often functional statements are meant to be more than just causal statements, as when Luhmann, for instance, the German system theorist, whom we will talk about later a little bit more, says that functional explanations are sort of second-order explanations in that they organize first-order causal explanations. So there's something more to just A causes B when we say that sort of A has the function X to produce B. You already see that on the syntactical level, it's more complex to use this functional statement. So one implication of using functional statements is also that there's a certain teleological connotation to them. So telos, right, Greek term for goal or directedness. So there's a certain directedness towards the goal. So education, right, has this function of, and then everything that comes after the of is making this goal a little bit more precise. In the organicistic functionalist theories, the goal is mostly the survival, right? Survival of the organism, as in the term survival of the fittest as well. And this teleological connotation is also not necessarily reducible to the intentions of individual actors or collective actors, such that the function of education is to stabilize societies, for instance, is not necessarily equivalent to the statement, it is the intention of the Federal Ministry of Education to use schools and education in order to stabilize societies. So this is also, it's different. So functions and intentions are different, even though, as we saw on the previous slides, the term function is used also as equivalent of cause or as equivalent of attention, but our expectations in function statements often go beyond these simple uses. So then another expectation of function statements is that there's a certain non-accidentality attached to them. So take this function statement here. So my nose has the function to hold my glasses. So yeah, something awkward here, right? So as Wrights put it, something can do something useful purely by accident, but it cannot have as its function something it does only by accident, right? So my nose happens to have, by accident, the function to hold my glasses, but obviously it sort of did not come into persistence or existence, or does not persist necessarily for this very reason. So a function should not be something purely accidental. Then functional statements are also special because they have this potentialis, this potential mode of existence. So they can be realized, but they do not have to be realized all of the time. So in that, they are similar to dispositions, dispositional statements, right? So like the glass is fragile, for instance, and the glass has this property of being fragile all of the time, but it does not necessarily have to realize this property by being broken most of the time. And the functional statements are somehow similar because yeah, functions can also exist even though they're not realized most of the time. Last but not least, functional statements, when we utter them, imply a certain objectivity in that they are not, let's say, purely subjective ascriptions. And this raises obviously the problems of which conditions do have to hold in order for something to carry objectively a function, right? Does it have to refer to a certain underlying categorical property in things or in institutions for something to have a function, or is it just enough for us to agree that something has a certain function? However that may be, objectivity is probably a necessary feature also of function statements, in that we cannot simply sort of ascribe any kind of functions to anything. So these are just 5 sort of expectations or also sort of necessary implications of function statements. Let us take a look now at different theories about what function statements are and can actually be, including in the social sciences. Yeah? So if we have statements of the type here, x as the function f to y for z, right, where x is, for instance, a certain institution that has a certain function that realizes itself in certain states, then directed towards a certain goal, right? So education, for instance, has the function to stabilize societies, or religious rituals have this function. Then how can we make sense of this, or including in the social sciences? A first account is called here representational account, and I follow here comments in his analysis of functional statements. And so representational accounts ask basically the question, why does a certain artifact, so an institution, for instance, exist, and what does it do? And the basic answer is that then for x to have a function f means that there was a prior representation about x, f, and its consequences, which brought them into being. So representation here means, for instance, intention, right? So there was a certain intention, for instance, of the Federal Ministry of Education to bring about or to establish an institution with a certain function f, yeah, that brings about certain consequences, for instance, such as educating more students, or also to perhaps even stabilize societies. And as you already notice here, this is a little bit problematic as a pure definition of what functionalist statements are, because it might just refer to a certain subgroup of functional statements, namely those where actors really have the intention, right? Also the perhaps collective representation of establishing an institution with a certain goal, and the institution then also fulfilling this goal without any kind of, let's say, secondary consequences. And this is the first problem of this account. And the second problem of this account is that many functionalist statements do not necessarily involve actors. So this is perhaps one of the characteristics and even advantages of functional statements. But many statements then, if interpreted as representational, would imply that we need to make up like a power elite, or the richest 200 families or so, that invented a certain function in order for a functional statement still to hold true, and this invites conspiracy